That Christmas wasn't supposed to hurt. The chandeliers glittered like captured stars, the pianist played slow carols near the grand staircase, and the Brooks mansion shimmered with everything money could buy. Gold garlands, imported wine, laughter polished to perfection. My father, Richard Brooks, raised a glass and toasted to everyone his business partners. My brother, even the caterer's new menu, but not to me. Then he turned, looked straight at me and said, "Sweetheart, some people just aren't built for real success." The room laughed, including my brother. I smiled back, but something inside me cracked. The Brooks Christmas Gala wasn't a holiday tradition, it was a yearly performance. Newport Beach's elite came dressed like a magazine spread, speaking in numbers, property deals, stock gains, political donations. The air smelled of cinnamon and expensive perfume. I stood near the 12-foot Christmas tree, its ornaments glittering like trophies. Every detail screamed status except me. My dress was simple navy blue, the kind I'd bought from a small local designer. Next to the women in sequins and diamonds, I might as well have been invisible. My father's voice boomed across the dining hall. To my son Michael, the man carrying the Brooks legacy forward, the guests' clapped glasses chimed. Michael beamed in his tailored tuxedo, his new Rolex flashing under the chandelier. He loved this moment, the applause, the validation. I clapped too quietly while trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. Then Dad looked at me. And to Natalie, "Still doing that? What's it called again? SEO thing?" The way he said it, slow and deliberate, like the term itself was a joke. A ripple of polite laughter spread across the table. One of Dad's old friends leaned over. "Is that some kind of sorcery?" More laughter. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. Michael smirked. "She's our family's free tech support." They laughed again. Even my mother Evelyn tried to hide a nervous chuckle behind her napkin. Inside, something went still, like the sound had drained out of the world, leaving only the hum of humiliation. I sipped my wine, my hand trembling slightly, and told myself not to let it show. For years I'd learned to mask the sting of their condescension. I'd been the odd one out since the day I stopped wanting what they wanted. 3 years ago, I worked in my father's company, Brooks Holdings. I handled marketing campaigns, branding, client strategy, until I suggested taking the business digital. I built a presentation about online branding, search visibility, and the future of marketing. Dad listened with that polite smile he wore before delivering bad news. "Reputation is built through handshakes, not hashtags, Natalie," he'd said. "Our clients don't Google us, they golf with us." A week later, my brother Michael presented a modified version of my proposal at a board meeting. The same ideas, the same numbers. He spoke with an irritating smugness, using the exact terminology I had coined, and pointedly avoided my gaze across the table. When the ideas came from him, Dad called it visionary. That was the day I quit. I took the savings from my small apartment, 2 second-hand laptops, and launched my own company, Lumen Digital Strategies. My first office was my kitchen table. My first client was a bakery trying to survive online. I worked 16-hour days, learned coding analytics and content optimization on my own. While Dad bragged about his legacy, I built mine quietly, one website, one campaign, one client at a time. Back at the dinner table, Michael was describing his latest resort project in Cabo, his voice smooth and confident. "It's about legacy, you know," he said, looking directly at me. "Some things just run in the family." My father nodded proudly. "Exactly. You can't teach pedigree. You're either born with it or you're not." My mother's hand brushed mine under the table, a gentle warning to stay quiet. She always did that, trying to keep the peace, pretending neutrality while choosing silence. I glanced at her, then at my father, who was laughing loudly with another investor. The light from the chandelier made his diamond cufflinks sparkle like tiny shields of arrogance. I used to believe I'd have a place at this table someday, that if I worked hard enough I'd earn his respect. But as I looked around that room at the glittering guests, the fake smiles, the practiced charm, I realized something: I wasn't invisible because I'd failed. I was invisible because I refused to play their game. The dinner dragged on. Conversations swirled around deals, stocks, and holiday trips to Aspen. No one asked me about my business. No one cared to know that I'd signed 3 new contracts last month or that my small digital thing had just helped a struggling brand triple its sales. Those weren't the kind of victories that impressed the Brooks family. When the plates cleared, Michael poured himself another glass of wine and leaned over. "Still chasing clients on the internet, sis. Maybe next year you'll have something worth toasting." I met his gaze and smiled, calm and deliberate. "Maybe I will." He laughed, assuming I was joking. He always did. Outside, the December air was sharp against my skin. The mansion behind me glowed like a movie set, but all I could think about was how hollow it felt inside. I walked across the marble driveway toward my car heels, clicking head high. My phone buzzed with an email from a client in London, one of my biggest yet confirming a contract for the new year. A 6-figure deal. I looked back at the house where the sound of music and laughter drifted through the cold night, and a strange calm settled over me. As I drove north toward San Francisco, the highway empty and silent Christmas lights blurred in my mirrors like fading embers. I replayed my father's words in my mind. Some people just aren't built for real success. Maybe he was right if success meant yachts, boardrooms, and inherited wealth. But there was another kind of success, one they didn't understand, the kind you earned alone through grit and late nights, and the belief that you were more than someone's afterthought. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the city lights falling away behind me. That night, somewhere between Newport Beach and the open highway, I made myself a quiet promise. This would be the last Christmas they ever laughed at me. Next year, when they said my name, it wouldn't be a joke, it would be an awe. They believed success was inherited. I was about to show them it could be built from scratch, from pain, from the fire they lit that night. My father always said the Brooks name was a crown, something to be worn with pride, polished daily, and never ever dropped. But to me, it felt like a chain. I grew up in a world where success wasn't earned, it was inherited, where every handshake mattered more than honesty, and every dinner table was another boardroom in disguise. I learned early that being a Brooks daughter meant knowing when to smile, when to disappear, and when to let the men talk. At 8, I used to sit on the grand staircase listening to my father's business meetings in the parlor below. He'd talk about property profits, partnerships, the same 3 Ps that defined his life. My brother Michael would sit beside him, mimicking his tone, his gestures, his laugh. Everyone saw the resemblance. They said he was a natural, the future of the family. I was the quiet one, the creative child who sketched logos on napkins and asked questions about people instead of numbers. When I told my father I wanted to study marketing and psychology, he smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile. "Marketing," he'd said. "You mean advertising. The art of convincing people to buy things they don't need. Your brother will be the one creating real value, Natalie. You'll make things look pretty." He said it gently, almost lovingly. But those words settled into me like stones. By the time I turned 16, Michael had already started shadowing him at the office. Dad would take him to business lunches, investor meetings, even golf trips. They wore matching suits and came home laughing about deals closed on the green. When I asked if I could join one day, my father chuckled. "Sweetheart, those meetings aren't really for you. But you can help your mother with the charity gala. It'll be good practice for your future." Practice for what exactly? For smiling beside some man who'd carry the Brooks name into another generation. The Brooks legacy wasn't a gift, it was a script. And I never fit the role. When I graduated from Northwestern with an MBA, Dad didn't come to the ceremony. He sent a card that said, "Proud of you, don't forget where you came from." But where I came from was a house that mistook control for love. When I joined Brooks Holdings, I told myself this was my chance to prove I belonged. I worked harder than anyone. I arrived before sunrise, stayed long after the partners had left. I built new branding strategies, suggested rebranding the firm's stale image, modernizing its outreach, and using SEO to expand their market. My ideas weren't risky, they were necessary. The world was changing. But to Dad, change was an insult. He dismissed my presentation halfway through. "We've thrived for 4 decades without gimmicks. People don't Google Brooks Holdings. They know us. Michael smiled from across the table, polished and confident. She means well, Dad. She just doesn't understand our clientele. That line still echoes in my head. Over the next months, Michael subtly took over my projects. He'd ask to review my proposals, then present them himself in meetings. Each time, Dad would beam with pride. "That's my boy," he'd say. Not once did he notice that half the slides still had my formatting, my designs, my research. The night it broke, we were in Dad's office, a cathedral of mahogany and ego. The city skyline burned orange outside the window. I'd just discovered that my proposal for a corporate digital rebrand, the one I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting, had been sent to the board under Michael's name. I walked in holding the printed deck. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Dad looked up from his desk, annoyed at the interruption. "Michael said you helped him draft it. Collaboration is how family businesses work, Natalie. I didn't help. He stole it." His expression hardened. "Watch your tone. We don't use words like that in this office." I laughed, bitter and small. "Right, because that would imply accountability." He stood towering, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through air. "You need to learn respect. You're emotional, Natalie. That's why people don't take you seriously. Business isn't about feelings, it's about composure." Composure. That word became the Brooks family anthem. It meant swallow it down, smile for the guests, pretend everything's fine. That night I cleared out my desk. No one stopped me. Michael didn't even look up from his phone. As I left, Dad called after me not to apologize, but to remind me that the Brooks Holdings Christmas Gala was next week. "Don't make things awkward," he said. I didn't show up. That was the first family event I'd ever missed. Evelyn called the next morning, her voice soft and cautious. "Your father was disappointed," she said. She never sided with me, but her voice was a careful balm, a quiet acknowledgement of the house's emotional temperature. "You know how he gets it. He just wants what's best for you. What's best for me." His favorite phrase. It had justified every dismissal, every silence, every public correction. It meant obedience. I spent the next 6 months freelancing from a second-hand desk in my apartment. My friends thought I'd lost my mind walking away from a 6-figure position in a family empire. But for the first time in years, I could breathe. I built Lumen Digital from nothing. Every client was a small victory. Every invoice paid was proof I could exist outside their world. Still, there were nights I'd stare at my reflection and hear his voice. Some people just aren't built for real success. It became fuel. Once, when I landed a new client, I sent my father a polite email, not bragging, just updating. He didn't respond. 2 weeks later, Michael posted an article online about Brooks Holdings' new digital strategy. My exact concept. My words. My phrasing. I stopped reaching out after that. Years later, when the company's old clients began to fade and younger competitors started dominating the market, part of me wanted to feel vindicated. But mostly I felt tired. I'd spent half my life trying to earn a place at a table that was never meant for me. And yet, no matter how far I ran, the weight of that legacy followed me at networking events where people asked, "Any relation to Richard Brooks?" At family holidays where success was measured in properties owned and names dropped. Even now, when my company's clients included international brands, my father refused to see it as real. He once told a friend at a dinner party Natalie works in advertising or something like that. Not quite corporate, but she's doing fine. Doing fine. That was the most validation I'd ever get. Sometimes I'd wonder what it would take for him to see me differently. To understand that legacy wasn't something you inherited, it was something you built. But people like Richard Brooks never looked down. They only looked in mirrors. The last time I visited the family home before that Christmas, he was standing by the window looking out at the ocean. "You should come back to the firm," he said. "There's still time to make something respectable of yourself." "I already have," I replied. He didn't turn around. "That online business, yes. That one." He sighed. "Natalie, don't mistake independence for accomplishment. Being part of something greater than yourself, that's what matters. I remember walking out of that house feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. The chain of his approval finally slipped, but I didn't know then how far he would go to make sure I stayed beneath him, or how poetic it would be when the legacy he worshipped would crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. Because the Brooks name wasn't the crown he thought it was. It was glass fragile, glittering, and one good truth away from shattering. I used to think invisibility was a curse. Now I realize it was a survival skill. Growing up in the Brooks household meant learning to exist quietly just enough to be present, never enough to disrupt. My father's voice filled every room long before he entered it, and my brother's laughter always followed like an echo. I was the pause between them, the silence that didn't belong anywhere. When I was 12, I won first place at a county science fair for designing an energy-efficient home model. My father never came to see it. He sent Michael instead, who left halfway through my presentation to take a call. That night over dinner, my father congratulated him for representing the family well. My name never came up. I used to wait for him to notice the small things, the certificates, the A's, the scholarships, but he didn't see those victories. He only saw potential in Michael, the heir, the image of himself. Whenever someone asked about his children, he'd say, "My son's going to take over the company." If they asked about me, he'd pause like trying to remember, then add, "My daughter's creative." Creative. The family word for impractical. It wasn't that he didn't love me. I think in his way he did. But his love was transactional, conditional on being useful to his image. When I helped him edit his speeches or organize charity events, he praised me for being helpful. When I spoke my mind, his expression changed like I'd just broken something expensive. Once, when I was 21, I tried to tell him I wanted to start my own business someday. He laughed. Entrepreneurship sounds glamorous, but it's not for everyone. You need structure, stability. You'd be eaten alive out there. I believed him for a while. I believed that confidence came with last names, that power was something you inherited, not earned. But deep down, I knew he was wrong. I just didn't have the courage yet to prove it. Michael, meanwhile, fit perfectly into the mold. He had our father's jawline, his ambition, and none of his doubt. At family dinners, he'd dominate the conversation: stock trends, expansion plans, tax strategies. My mother would smile politely while passing dishes, her silence practiced after years of learning that disagreement wasn't worth the noise. If I ever tried to speak, my father would steer the conversation elsewhere. "That's interesting, honey," he'd say. "But let's stay on topic." The topic, of course, was always Michael. Being invisible wasn't about being unseen, it was about being unheard. And for years I lived that way, blending into the background of my own family story. After leaving Brooks Holdings, I tried to convince myself that I'd escaped it. But even in San Francisco, the echoes followed me. Investors would glance at my last name on proposals and ask, "Any relation to Richard Brooks?" I'd smile tightly. Yes. But I built my company from scratch. They'd nod, still skeptical, assuming I was just playing in the shadow of the family fortune. Sometimes I'd check the news and see Michael's name attached to another deal, another feature. The Brooks legacy. Continues, one article said, showing him and my father shaking hands under a company logo I'd once helped design and later repurposed for my first Lumen Digital mock-ups. I closed the laptop, the taste of resentment sharp in my mouth. But invisibility had its advantages. It taught me how to observe, how to read people, how to anticipate before reacting. It made me better at business than they ever realized. Clients loved me because I listened. I noticed things others missed. I didn't need a spotlight to prove my worth. I built trust quietly, consistently. Still, there were nights when the weight of being unseen pressed heavy. I'd walk home through fog-drenched streets, past glowing cafes and laughter spilling from doorways, wondering what it would feel like to be fully seen, to walk into a room and know I belonged there without explanation. The closest I came to that was with Claire. Claire Jensen had been my closest friend since college. She was fearless in all the ways I wasn't. While I second-guessed myself, she charged forward. When I told her about my idea for Lumen Digital, she didn't laugh. She said, "Let's build it." We spent nights on her apartment floor surrounded by laptops, takeout containers, and vision boards. She believed in me when no one else did. When the first client came, Sophia Lynn, a fashion entrepreneur who'd seen my small blog post about brand storytelling, it was Claire who convinced me to take the leap. "You're not small, Nat," she said. "You're just early." That line stuck with me. Early, not small. Still, no matter how much progress I made, my family refused to acknowledge it. I'd send updates, new clients, features growth milestones, but they went unanswered. Once Michael forwarded one of my emails to my father with a single line, "She's still doing that online thing." Dad's reply came minutes later. "At least she's staying busy." Busy, another Brooks synonym for irrelevant. 2 years later, when Lumen landed its first 6-figure contract, I finally worked up the nerve to call my father. I thought maybe this was the moment he'd see me differently. I told him about the deal, the client, the impact we were making. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "That's nice, honey. I'm glad you're keeping yourself occupied." I wanted to scream, but instead I just said, "Thank you," and hung up. That was the night I realized invisibility wasn't accidental, it was enforced. I'd been edited out of their story because I didn't serve the narrative of control. My mother tried to bridge the gap in her way. She'd call occasionally, her voice soft and hesitant. "Your father worries about you," she'd say. "He just doesn't understand your world. My world." That was another code phrase. It meant a world that didn't revolve around him. She'd tell me about Michael's latest achievement, the new yacht, the cover story in a business magazine, the awards dinner in Manhattan. Each time I'd listen, smile, and change the subject. But inside, a fire kept growing, slow, quiet, patient. When the invitation for the upcoming Christmas gala arrived, engraved in gold foil, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part wanted to show up, stand tall, and prove I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. The invitation sat on my desk for days. Then one evening, while reviewing analytics for a client campaign, I got an email from Sophia Lynn Lumen's results. "This quarter are extraordinary. I want to bring you in for a global partnership." A global partnership. A multi-million-dollar deal. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. All I could think about was that golden invitation glinting beside my laptop. Maybe I'd go this year. Not for them. For me. Because invisibility was no longer my armor, it was my past. And this Christmas, I wasn't coming to blend in. I was coming to be seen. The envelope arrived the first week of December. Thick, white, heavy, sealed with gold wax, and embossed with the Brooks family crest. The kind of invitation that was meant to be felt before it was read. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The annual Christmas Gala. My father's crowning event. Every year it was the same, a sea of tailored suits, diamond bracelets, and expensive laughter echoing off marble floors. Every year he used it as a stage to remind people of who the Brooks family was. Not who we actually were, but the version that gleamed in photographs. I turned the envelope over in my hand, the wax seal catching the light. My stomach tightened. I hadn't attended the gala in 3 years. The last time I did, I'd been seated at the end of the table between an aging banker and his wife, both of whom spent most of the evening asking about my brother's accomplishments. "Are you still doing design?" the banker's wife had asked, swirling her champagne. "Marketing," I'd corrected gently. She smiled pity, softening her tone. "Oh, that's nice. Very creative." Creative? That word again. Always used as a way to say small. By the time dessert arrived, my father was on stage thanking Michael for his vision and leadership, while I sat in the back, smiling through clenched teeth. Now, years later, the invitation felt like an echo from a world I'd outgrown. But part of me, some fragile, restless part, wanted to go. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that old hunger for acknowledgement still whispering that this time things might be different. I opened it. The card inside shimmered in silver script. "The Brooks family invites you to our annual Christmas gala. Dress black tie. Location: the Brooks Estate, Newport Beach." The same address I once called home. I placed it on my desk beside my laptop, where Lumen Digital's analytics dashboard glowed with rising numbers. A new client had just signed a major deal, a luxury skincare brand expanding globally. My company was thriving, growing faster than I dreamed possible. But one email, one embossed card, and I felt 17 again, small beneath my father's shadow. Claire noticed immediately during our team meeting the next morning. "You're quiet," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "My dad's Christmas gala. He sent me an invitation." She raised an eyebrow. "The same one who called your company a cute side project. That dad?" "The very same." She leaned back in her chair. "You're not seriously going, are you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I should. Just to show them I'm not who I used to be." Claire grinned. "Oh, I get it. The classic show up and stun moment. Revenge via elegance." I laughed, but there was an ache behind it. "I don't want revenge. I just want him to see me." Her voice softened. "He won't. Not the way you want. But you'll see yourself, and that might be better." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the estate, the way the chandeliers glowed like constellations, the smell of pine and perfume, the sound of polite applause. I imagined my father standing at the top of the grand staircase, raising a glass to toast the Brooks legacy. And then I imagined walking in, not as the invisible daughter, not as a disappointment, but as Natalie Brooks, founder and CEO of Lumen Digital, one of the fastest-growing marketing firms on the West Coast. The next morning, I RSVP'd yes. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur of work deadlines and restless nights. When I wasn't reviewing contracts or planning campaigns, I found myself obsessing over small details: what to wear, what to say, whether it was petty to want to look spectacular. Claire helped me pick the dress, a deep emerald satin gown with a clean, modern cut. Understated, but commanding. "This isn't a costume," she said. "It's armor." The day of the gala. I drove to Newport Beach with the top down, the wind cold against my face. My phone buzzed constantly, emails, messages, client updates, but I ignored them. For once, I wasn't thinking about work. I was thinking about walking back into the lion's den. The Brooks estate looked exactly as I remembered: the manicured hedges, the sprawling drive lined with black cars, the glow of chandeliers spilling through tall windows. A valet opened my door, his smile rehearsed. "Welcome, Ms. Brooks." For a moment, the sound of my last name startled me. It had always belonged to them. Inside, the air smelled like pine champagne and old money. Guests mingled beneath garlands and crystal lights, laughter rippling through the room like a performance. Everything glittered, from the ornaments to the people. And then I saw him. My father stood near the staircase, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a glass of whiskey in hand. His hair was grayer now, but his posture hadn't changed. Michael was beside him, charming a cluster of investors, his wife draped in diamonds. I hesitated at the doorway. No one noticed me at first, just like old times. Then Michael spotted me. His smile flickered, polite but tight. "Natalie," he said, walking over. "Didn't think you'd make it this year." "I got the invitation," I said lightly. It felt rude to decline. He glanced at my dress, then my glass-empty hands. "Well, it's good to see you. Dad's been curious about you lately." "Curious?" I raised an eyebrow. He smirked. "You know how he is. He still doesn't understand what you do exactly. Some kind of social media thing, digital strategy," I said evenly. "And it's going well." Michael nodded absently, already scanning the room for more important people. "That's great. Keep at it, Nat." And then he was gone. It was almost funny how predictably dismissive they still were. The only thing that stung was how little it surprised me. When my father finally saw me, he didn't look shocked or pleased, just mildly amused. "Natalie," he said, his voice smooth and public. "You look elegant. I wasn't sure you'd show." "Neither was I," I replied. He chuckled. "You've been busy, I hear. Some kind of small agency, small agency." The words landed like a slap disguised as a compliment. "Not small anymore," I said quietly. "We just signed our first international deal." He nodded, clearly uninterested. Well, I'm glad you're keeping yourself occupied. And there it was. The wound reopened the exact phrasing I'd heard my whole life. Keeping yourself occupied. The rest of the night was a blur of polite conversations and careful smiles. Every guest asked about Michael's new projects. No one asked about mine. I could feel my invisibility returning, wrapping around me like a ghost of who I used to be. But when I stepped outside for air, I checked my phone. 57 unread notifications. My team group chat was exploding. Claire, check your email, now. Another message followed from Sophia Lynn. Congratulations. Lumen just hit the $1 million mark in valuation. You did it. The screen blurred for a moment as tears stung my eyes. In that instant, standing beneath the twinkling lights of my father's empire, I realized something profound. I didn't need him to see me, because the world already did. I slipped my phone back into my purse, wiped my eyes, and looked back through the glass doors at my father's party. The legacy he'd spent a lifetime protecting was inside that house. But the future, the one I built with my own hands, fueled by Lumen's bright growing success, was out here waiting for me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. The night glittered like it was auditioning for perfection. The chandeliers above the Brooks Ballroom cast a golden haze over the crowd of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Christmas carols played faintly beneath the hum of conversation, but no one was really listening. This wasn't a celebration, it was a performance, and my father was the director. He spotted me across the room just as one of the waiters offered me a glass of champagne. His smile was tight, the kind that never touched his eyes. "Natalie," he said, his tone heavy with polite surprise. "You look radiant." There was a pause, the kind that begged for a compliment in return. "I didn't offer one." "You've been keeping busy, I hear," he continued, swirling his drink. "Running that little business of yours, Lumen Digital," I corrected. "We're expanding next quarter." He laughed the way someone laughs at a child announcing she's going to the moon. "Expanding." "My dear, you make it sound like you're running a conglomerate." "I suppose that depends on your definition," I said. Michael appeared then, sliding into the conversation with that effortless charm that made people forgive how cruel he could be. "Dad, don't be too hard on her," he said. "Natalie's doing her best. She's always been creative." There it was again. That word, creative. My father smirked, raising his glass slightly. "Well, every family needs a dreamer, I suppose." They laughed. Michael, his wife Lauren, even one of my father's colleagues who'd wandered too close to the spectacle. I stood there, the air around me thick with the sound of my own humiliation. "I'll drink to that," Michael said, clinking his glass against my father's. "To family and creative pursuits." I could have walked away. I should have walked away. But something in me snapped, something quiet and sharp that had been waiting years for this moment. I smiled sweetly. "Actually, I'll drink that too," I said, raising my own glass. "To family and the pursuit of things that actually work." Michael's smile faltered first. My father's brow twitched just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. I shrugged, feigning innocence. "Oh, nothing. I just meant how impressive it is that Brooks Holdings still manages to stay afloat given, well, everything." Lauren's eyes flickered. "Everything, the acquisition that fell through last quarter," I said smoothly, "and the pending lawsuit. I read about it in the journal. Rough year, huh?" The silence that followed was electric. My father straightened his shoulders. "Those are temporary setbacks. You can't trust everything you read in the press." "Of course not," I said softly. "But you can trust numbers. And numbers don't lie." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Michael let out a brittle laugh. "Still fiery, huh, sis? Always loved that about you." But his eyes, usually so confident, shifted nervously as he scanned the crowd, realizing the conversation was too public. I took a slow sip of champagne. "You mistook quiet for weakness, Michael. That's your mistake." Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. Natalie Brooks. It was Margaret Reynolds, one of my father's oldest friends, wrapped in red velvet and expensive perfume. She swept me into an embrace, her tones syrupy with condescension. I hardly recognized you. You look so grown up. What have you been up to? Still freelancing. I smiled tightly. Something like that. Oh, how lovely, she said, already turning toward my father. You must be so proud of her, Richard. My father chuckled. Of course. Natalie's always had a good head for creative projects. The crowd around us laughed again, softer this time. Polite. Controlled. And that's when I knew I'd never win their approval because they'd already decided what box I belonged in. The pianist shifted into a jazzy rendition of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. A waiter passed by with hors d'oeuvres. Somewhere near the back, a camera flashed for one of the society pages. I stepped away before the mask slipped off my face. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of pine and salt. I stood at the edge of the terrace, my breath clouding in the winter air, trying to steady my hands. From behind me, a low voice said, "He shouldn't talk to you like that." I turned. It was Daniel Ross, a former colleague from years ago. Tall, kind-eyed, the sort of man who didn't have to dominate a room to own it. He worked in finance now, last I heard, though he'd always had more empathy than ambition. "It's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "It's not," he replied. "I watched the whole thing. They treat you like you're expendable. You're not." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Tell them that." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "You shouldn't be here alone. Not around people who've decided your worth for you." Something in his tone, gentle not pitying, hit deeper than I expected. "I'm not alone," I said quietly. "Not anymore." "Good," he said, "because you deserve rooms where you don't have to explain why you belong." I looked back through the tall glass doors at the golden room full of people who had never really seen me. My father was laughing again, surrounded by his circle of admirers, already forgetting the daughter standing outside in the cold. But as I stared, a strange calm settled over me. They could keep their golden room. I had something better, a truth they couldn't buy, a freedom they couldn't recognize. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Claire again. Claire just saw the numbers. "You're trending. Lumen's story is going viral. Investors are noticing. Call me when you can." I smiled, a slow warmth spreading through me. While my father's empire was built on borrowed power, mine was built on resilience, and it was only getting stronger. I realized the truth Daniel saw. I had already chosen my allies and my battles. I looked at Daniel. "You know what's funny?" I said. "He thinks I'm still trying to impress him." Daniel tilted his head. "Are you?" I exhaled, the answer landing in the air between us. "Not anymore." The music from inside swelled again, the sound of laughter and crystal glasses clinking. It was supposed to sound like success, but to me it sounded hollow. The night that began with humiliation ended with something else entirely, a spark steady and defiant glowing in the quiet. And as the ocean wind tugged at my hair, I whispered into the cold, "Let them laugh. They won't be laughing for long." When I got home that night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. The kind of tears that taste like rage and humiliation mixed together. But instead there was only silence, a cold, hollow quiet that filled the corners of my apartment like smoke. I took off the emerald gown carefully, as if it were armor I'd worn into battle and lost. My reflection in the mirror looked composed, almost elegant, but my eyes told the truth. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it just hums under your skin, steady and relentless. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. A dozen unread messages from Claire blinked on the screen, each one more urgent than the last. "Claire, call me. Now." "Claire, Natalie. You're not going to believe this." "Claire, we've been featured. Everywhere." I opened the latest one. Attached was a screenshot from Forbes Lumen Digital's bold expansion, how a woman-owned startup quietly built a multi-million-dollar empire. I blinked at the headline, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The timing felt poetic, almost divine. While my father was mocking me in his ballroom, the rest of the world had just discovered my company. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sharp, trembling one. I texted Claire back, "I'll call you in the morning." Then I turned off the phone. For the first time in years, I didn't want to respond to anyone. I didn't want congratulations or validation. I just wanted stillness, the kind that comes after the storm breaks, and everything is finally irrevocably clear. I thought about my father's voice, that polished tone he used when belittling me under the guise of civility. "You've been keeping busy, haven't you, busy?" As if that word could shrink an empire into a hobby. He had no idea that while he was performing power, I was building it. The next morning, I woke early sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. My phone buzzed again, notifications, emails, interview requests. Lumen's site traffic exploded overnight. Investors were asking about partnerships. Clients wanted expansion meetings. And through it all, a quiet, dangerous thought began to grow. He's going to see it. There was no way he wouldn't. The Brooks name carried weight in the business world. My last name was his legacy, even if he'd tried to erase me from it. He'd see the headline. He'd see the numbers. He'd see my name printed in bold. By noon, I was sitting in Claire's office, both of us surrounded by printouts and coffee cups. "You realize this changes everything," she said, scrolling through her tablet. "You're not just a startup founder anymore. You're a story. A story, the kind that people want to write about. A woman your father underestimated builds a company worth millions. Come on, Nat." "It's cinematic." I smiled faintly. "You think he'll read it?" Claire looked up. "He'll read it twice." That night I lay awake watching city lights flicker through my window. I tried to imagine his face when he saw it the moment the illusion of superiority cracked. Would he be angry, ashamed, or worse, impressed? The thought unsettled me. I didn't want his admiration anymore. I wanted distance. I wanted peace. But fate had other plans. 2 days later, while finalizing a new contract, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Newport Beach area code. I knew before I answered, "Hello?" There was a pause. Then his voice, calm, calculated, and unmistakably strained. "Natalie." I almost didn't recognize it at first. My father's tone had always carried that easy confidence, the sound of a man certain he controlled the room. But this was different. Controlled still, but softer. "Dad," I said evenly. "I saw the article," he began. "Congratulations. It's impressive. Impressive." Another Brooks word. I waited. "You've built quite a name for yourself," he continued. "Lumen Digital was it? I had no idea it was this big." "That's because you never asked." He exhaled. "I suppose that's true." There was a silence that stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he said, "You know, you could have mentioned this at the gala. We could have celebrated properly." I almost laughed. "Celebrate? You spent half the night mocking me." "That was never my intention." "Intent doesn't matter," I said quietly. "Impact does." For a moment there was nothing but the faint static of the line. "I'd like you to come to dinner," he said finally. "This weekend. Just family. We can talk." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed, "Don't go," but curiosity, the same fragile thread that had kept me hoping for years, pulled harder. "Fine," I said. "Dinner. Good," he replied, relief slipping into his voice. "I'll see you then." When the call ended, I sat back and stared at the city skyline. It felt unreal, like the world had flipped overnight. The man who once told me I wasn't fit for his world was now inviting me back into it. That weekend I drove down to Newport again, but this time my pulse was steady. I wasn't the same girl who'd stood on that terrace feeling small. I was walking into that mansion as the CEO of $1 million company. The same valet greeted me, his eyes widening slightly when I pulled up in a new black Tesla, the company car I'd bought 2 months earlier. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks." Inside the house looked unchanged, but the energy felt different. Quieter, almost nervous. My mother was the first to appear, her smile tentative. "You look beautiful," she said. "Thanks, Mom." She hesitated before adding, "Your father's proud. He won't say it outright, but I know he is." I wanted to believe her. But pride wasn't in his vocabulary when it came to me. It was control he craved. Not admiration. Dinner was a performance as always. Crystal glasses, roasted lamb, the faint scent of pine candles. My father sat at the head of the table, the king of his self-made empire. Michael and Lauren were there too, their perfect couple acting as polished as ever. So my father began cutting into his steak. Tell us about Lumen. How did you manage this growth? His tone was deceptively casual, but I recognized the glint in his eyes. This wasn't curiosity, it was reconnaissance. It's a mix of strategy, timing, and authenticity, I said. We don't pretend to be something we're not. People respond to honesty. Honesty? He repeated like it was a foreign word. That's rare in business. Maybe that's why it works. Michael chuckled, sipping his wine. Well, you always had guts. I'll give you that. His laughter was forced, his eyes avoiding mine, the change in his demeanor noticeable. Lauren added sweetly, It's wonderful you found your niche. My father's expression shifted slightly, the corners of his mouth tightening. $1 million is no small feat, he said. But let's not get carried away. There's a difference between success and sustainability. There it was, the correction, the warning, the unspoken rule. Don't outshine us. I met his gaze steadily. Don't worry, Dad, I said. I've learned sustainability from the best. Watching you all these years taught me exactly what not to do. His fork froze mid-air. The room went silent, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for speaking the truth. That night when I left the estate, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because as I drove away, my phone buzzed again, another investor inquiry, another partnership offer. My father had his empire of glass and gold. But I had something stronger. Mine was built to last. It was 1 week after that dinner when everything began to unravel, not for me, but for him. I was in my office early that morning, the city still wrapped in fog, when Claire burst through the glass doors with her laptop clutched to her chest. Nat, she said breathless, you need to see this. She spun the screen toward me. The headline was, Bold, Merciless, Brooks Holdings Under Investigation, Allegations of Mismanagement and Fraud Surface. I blinked. You're kidding. She shook her head. It's everywhere. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an inquiry. Someone leaked internal financial reports. There are millions in unaccounted funds. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse steady but cold. For a moment I just stared at the article, the name Richard Brooks repeated in black ink, the empire he'd worshipped cracking right there on the front page. Claire hesitated. Are you okay? I let out a quiet laugh, soft, disbelieving. Yeah, I just didn't expect karma to keep such good timing. She smiled faintly. You think it's true? With him, I said. It's always been about appearances. Sooner or later, that kind of empire collapses. Still, I couldn't stop myself from opening the article, scrolling through paragraphs that detailed accounting irregularities, potential investor deception, and family involvement. My brother's name was there too. Michael Brooks, Chief Financial Officer. Claire caught my expression. You think they'll blame each other? They'll try, I said quietly. But it doesn't matter who they point fingers at. The damage is done. My phone buzzed, then a string of missed calls. My mother, my brother, and finally him. I didn't answer. For years I'd dreamed of this moment, not the scandal itself, but the reckoning. The day when the pedestal he'd built for himself finally cracked under the weight of arrogance. But when it came, I didn't feel triumphant. Just free. At noon, I finally answered my mother's call. Her voice was shaky, brittle. Natalie, have you seen the news I have? Your father's furious, she whispered. The board's meeting is in an hour. Reporters are outside the house. It's awful. I'm sorry, Mom, I said. And I meant it. But I wasn't sorry for him. He's asking for you, she said suddenly. He wants to talk. He said you'd understand how to handle media crises. You were always good at strategy. I laughed under my breath. He wants my help. After everything, he's desperate. Natalie, please. Desperate. The word landed like music. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just hung up. By late afternoon, Lumen Digital's inbox was flooded with interview requests, not just about our success, but about my connection to Brooks Holdings. Some wanted quotes, others wanted me to comment on the irony, the daughter he dismissed, now the one untarnished by scandal. Claire handled them gracefully. No statements, she told the press. Ms. Brooks is focused on her own company. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, my office grew quiet. I sat there watching headlines multiply. Every outlet had the story now: CNN, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. The Brooks legacy was burning in real time. My phone buzzed again. A single message, this time from my father. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment before typing back, about what the reply came almost instantly. "The company. The family. I can fix this, but I need you. Please come to the estate. Please." My father had never said that word to me in my life. I didn't answer. I turned off the phone and sat there in silence, the glow of the city outside reflecting off the glass walls. For years I'd let him define worth. For years I'd fought for a seat at his table. And now the table was collapsing, and he was reaching for me to steady it. 2 hours later, Claire stopped by my office door, her coat slung over her arm. "You're not actually going, are you?" I looked up at her. "I don't know." She hesitated. "If you go, don't go as the daughter trying to fix things. Go as the woman who already has." That night I drove to Newport again, the road lit by streetlights and memories I didn't want to revisit. When I arrived, the estate looked darker than I'd ever seen it. No glowing chandeliers, no staff greeting guests, just shadows stretching across the marble steps. Inside, I found him in his study, surrounded by piles of papers and empty glasses. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, the image of control gone. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You came?" he said finally. "You asked." He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit, please." I stayed standing. He rubbed his temples. "They're tearing the company apart. The board's panicking. Investors are pulling out. Michael." He stopped shaking his head. "He's threatening legal action against the board. He's not handling it well. I read the articles," I said. He exhaled slowly. "It's not all true. Some of it is exaggeration. But perception matters. You know that. You're good at perception." "Funny," I said, "I learned that from you." He looked at me, something like regret flickering in his eyes. "Natalie, I need your help. You have connections. Media influence. You can change the narrative." I laughed softly. "You mean to fix your reputation? Call it what you want," he said. "But if this destroys Brooks Holdings, it destroys our family name." "Our family name," I repeated, the words sharp in my mouth. "You spent years pretending I wasn't part of that family. You said I wasn't worthy of your world. And now you want me to save it." He stood up, then his voice rising. "You're still Brooks. Like it or not, your name is tied to mine." "No," I said, stepping closer. "It used to be. Not anymore." He froze. "I built something without your money, without your approval, without your world. My name doesn't belong to you anymore, it belongs to me." His jaw tightened. "You'd let your own father fall," I met his eyes. "You let me fall a long time ago." The silence that followed was long and heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He looked older, suddenly, smaller somehow. "You've changed," he said. "I had to," I replied. "You left me no choice." I turned to leave, my heels echoing on the marble floor. "Natalie," he called after me. "When this is over, you'll regret walking away." I stopped at the doorway. I already regret staying as long as I did. Outside, the air was cold, but it felt clean. I drove back toward the city, the estate shrinking in my rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Halfway home, my phone buzzed again, messages, alerts, notifications piling in. Breaking news: Brooks Holdings shares plummet after CEO resignation. Board announces emergency restructuring. I pulled over, watching as the headlines refreshed again and again. And then beneath all of it, an email notification popped up from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: investment opportunity. Lumen Digital expansion. The sender, Andrew Fields, managing partner, Crestview Capital. Body. We've been following your company's growth. I believe there's room to scale globally. Let's talk about a partnership. I smiled a slow, quiet smile that carried years of vindication. My father's empire was collapsing. Mine was just beginning. The morning after Brooks Holdings collapsed, my phone didn't stop ringing. It started before sunrise. Unknown numbers blocked calls, voicemails stacking faster than I could delete them. I let it buzz across my desk while I drank my coffee in silence. The sound didn't bother me. It sounded like freedom. Claire arrived an hour later, holding 2 cappuccinos and a face full of cautious excitement. "You've seen the news," I nodded. The board forced him out. Resigned under pressure, she corrected, setting the coffee beside me. "That's the polite way to say he was kicked out of his own kingdom." I opened my laptop. Every major outlet had the story, "Richard Brooks steps down as CEO, amid scandal, Brooks legacy. Crumbles after financial misconduct investigation. Brooks Holdings, stock drops, 40% overnight." Each headline was a stone thrown into the glass mansion he'd spent his life building. Claire glanced at me. "You're not celebrating?" I looked out the window. "No, I'm just done." It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something quieter. Detachment. I didn't need to gloat. The truth had already spoken for me. By mid-morning, the calls shifted tone. Investors who'd once brushed me off were suddenly eager to talk. "We've followed your growth," one said. "You seem to have a stable operation, interested in collaboration." Stable. The same word my father used when he told me I needed structure. I almost laughed. When Claire left for lunch, I finally listened to one voicemail, just one. It was my brother. "Natalie, it's Michael. Listen, I don't know what's going on. Dad's losing it. Mom's freaking out, and the press won't leave us alone. We need you here. You understand the media side. You can spin this. Please call me back." I didn't. 2 hours later, another voicemail came. This one from my father. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the polish it used to carry. "I know I made mistakes, but don't let them destroy everything we built. I can fix this if I have time. Please, Natalie, don't let them bury my name." I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. The irony was brutal. He'd spent decades protecting his reputation like it was sacred scripture, and now he was begging me to save it. That evening, I left the office late. The city glowed beneath a pale drizzle, every surface reflecting light. I took the long way home past the harbor where the expensive yachts were docked in neat, quiet rows. One of them had once been his, a symbol of success. Now it was listed for sale online. I parked near the pier, rolled down the window, and just sat there breathing in the cold ocean air. My father had always said that money was the measure of a man. But power, the kind that comes from independence, was something he never understood. He measured worth by ownership. I measured it by peace. When I got home, another notification waited in my inbox, an invitation to a tech summit in San Francisco. The subject line read, "Keynote Speaker Opportunity Women Who Built Empires." I smiled. The next morning I called Claire. "We're expanding," I said. "I want offices in New York and London by next quarter." She paused. "You're serious?" "Completely." Her voice warmed. "You really did it, Nat. You built what they said you couldn't." That week moved fast: meetings, contracts, interviews. My name started appearing in places I'd only dreamed of: Forbes, Fast Company, Entrepreneur Weekly. The irony was poetic. The same media my father had once courted was now calling me the daughter who rebuilt her family's name by redefining success. But I didn't do it for redemption. I did it to prove that worth doesn't need inheritance. On Friday night, I drove to Newport again. Not to see him, just to see what remained. The estate looked smaller somehow. The once impeccable lawn was unkempt, a few lights flickering in the upper windows. Through the gate, I saw my mother standing on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug, staring at nothing. I parked on the side of the road and sat there, unsure if I wanted her to see me. After a moment, she did. Our eyes met across the distance. She raised her hand slowly, tentative. It wasn't a plea for help, but an acknowledgement. I returned the gesture. She didn't wave me over. She didn't call out. But for the first time, she didn't look afraid of choosing me. The next day I woke to another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was firm, professional. Ms. Brooks, this is Andrew Fields from Crestview Capital. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership with Lumen Digital. Are you available next week? I met him 3 days later in a downtown conference room overlooking the bay. Andrew was sharp but calm, the kind of man who spoke in numbers but listened in meaning. He'd done his research on my company, my story, my father's fall. I don't want to work with you because of your family, he said. I want to work with you because you built something that survived without them. That was the first time anyone had said it out loud. By the end of the meeting, he offered me a deal that would triple Lumen's reach in less than 6 months. Global expansion, full autonomy, no interference. I signed it without hesitation. That night I walked home through the quiet streets of downtown, the air thick with the smell of rain and asphalt. The city felt alive, pulsing beneath my feet. When I reached my apartment, I checked my phone again. There were still dozens of missed calls from Newport, dozens of unread messages. But one stood out, another voicemail from my father. His voice was different this time. Fragile. Natalie, they've taken everything. The company, the house, even the accounts. Your mother's staying with her sister. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to be without all of it. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I deleted the message. Because I finally understood something, I couldn't save him from himself. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and watched the city wake up through my window. The sky was streaked with orange and pale blue, the kind of dawn that made you believe in clean slates. My father's world had ended under the weight of pride. Mine had begun in the absence of his approval. When I stepped into my office later that day, Claire was waiting with a grin. "Guess who just called?" she said. "The Wall Street Journal. They wanted to do a feature on Lumen's expansion, title pending, but they suggested something like, 'The Quiet Rise of Natalie Brooks.'" I laughed, shaking my head. "Quiet, huh?" "Yeah," she said. "Quiet but unstoppable." Outside, the sun had fully risen. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't reach for it. The calls could wait. The world could wait. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was strange how quiet success could feel. You'd think it would roar, shaking walls, echoing through every part of your life. But for me, it arrived like a slow sunrise. Soft, unapologetic, unstoppable. 3 months had passed since the fall of Brooks Holdings. 3 months since my father's voice cracked through my phone, asking for help I would never give. And in those months, Lumen Digital became something far bigger than I had dared to imagine. We opened our new headquarters in New York, a glass and steel building that overlooked the skyline like a promise fulfilled. The launch was featured on Forbes, The Guardian, even Business Insider. The headline read, "From Exile to Empire: How Natalie Brooks Built a Global Powerhouse." I stood in the lobby that morning, surrounded by the team that had grown with me from day one. Claire, the interns who'd become executives, designers, who'd once worked out of cafes, now managing divisions across continents. "You realize what you've done, right?" Claire said, her grin wide and incredulous. "You're officially in the top 1% of women-led tech companies in the country." I smiled, though the weight of her words didn't quite sink in. "We did this," I corrected. The truth was, the success didn't feel like victory. It felt like breath finally being able to inhale without the weight of his voice in my head. But with that freedom came something else, the whispers. The press couldn't resist the irony of it all. They called me the prodigal daughter, turned powerhouse, the heiress who didn't need inheritance. Every headline, every panel invitation, every glowing review, it all had his shadow in it. My father's name forever stitched into the narrative of my rise. Even when they praised me, they used him as the backdrop. I hated it. One night after a late meeting, I sat alone in my office, the city a blur of light beneath me. Claire had gone home hours ago. The building was silent except for the hum of the servers, and the low buzz of my computer monitor. On my desk sat a box, small worn, tied with a faded blue ribbon. It had arrived that morning with no return address. Inside was an old photograph me at 12 years old, standing beside my father in front of Brooks Tower. He had his hand on my shoulder, pride blazing in his smile. On the back in his handwriting were 3 words, "You proved me wrong." I sat there for a long time staring at those words until they blurred. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't love. It was acknowledgement. A surrender, maybe. And somehow that made it hurt more. The next morning, Claire found me at my desk, still holding the photo. "Where'd that come from?" she asked. "My father," I said. Her expression softened. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing." I slipped the photo into a drawer. It's too late to rewrite history. But the truth lingered. I wasn't as unshakable as I pretended. The more success I gained, the more I realized how much of my drive had been built on defiance. And now that I'd won, I didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. That weekend I went back to Newport, not to the mansion, but to the old boardwalk where I used to sit as a kid sketching ideas for businesses on napkins, while my father held meetings in his glass office nearby. The air smelled like salt and memory. I found him there. Not in his old suit or behind a desk, but sitting alone on a weathered bench wearing a plain jacket, his hair grayer than I remembered. For a moment I thought about walking past him, letting the moment dissolve into the distance. But something in me, curiosity, maybe mercy, pulled me closer. "Didn't think I'd see you here," I said. He looked up slowly. "I wasn't sure you would." The silence between us was thick-heavy with everything that had never been said. "I heard about your expansion," he said finally. "New York, London. Impressive." I nodded. "Lumen's doing well." He looked out at the water, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Better than Brooks Holdings ever did." I didn't answer. "You were right," he said after a long pause. "I built everything on appearances. You built something real." The admission hung there between us. "I don't want your forgiveness," he added quietly. "But I need you to know, I see it now. What I did, what I said." I studied his face, the man who had spent his whole life chasing the illusion of power, now stripped of everything that made him feel invincible. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just stopped needing you." He nodded slowly. "That might be worse." Maybe I said softly. "But it's honest." We sat there in silence, the sound of the ocean filling the spaces words couldn't. He looked smaller somehow, not just physically but spiritually. Like the empire had drained the life out of him, and what was left was just a man facing the ruins of his own pride. After a few minutes I stood. "Take care of yourself, Dad." He looked up, eyes glistening faintly. "You too, Natalie." I walked away before the ache in my chest could settle too deeply. Back in the city, life moved fast again. Lumen was scaling, new hires were onboarding, and my calendar was packed with calls from investors and journalists. But something in me had shifted. For the first time, my drive wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about building something that could outlive every mistake, his mine, all of it. One night I found myself on a stage at that tech summit in San Francisco, the same event that had once felt like an impossible dream. The lights were blinding the crowd, a blur of faces. When the moderator asked what motivated you to build Lumen Digital, I paused. I could have told the story everyone expected, the family drama, the revenge arc, the triumph over doubt. But instead I said I built Lumen because I was tired of waiting for permission to belong. I wanted to create something where everyone belongs from the start. We build visibility and clarity for brands that have earned it, not just inherited it. I was speaking not just for myself, but for every woman who was told she was only creative. The applause was soft at first, then thunderous. As I stepped off the stage, Claire met me in the wings, her eyes shining. "You didn't even mention him," she said. I smiled. "Exactly." That night, as I flew home, I looked out at the city lights glittering below and realized something I hadn't before. Revenge might have been the spark, but it wasn't the fire that kept me burning. Purpose was. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anything. I was home. The first snow of the season came early that year. Fat, lazy flakes drifted past my office windows, softening the city's usual chaos. It was mid-December, and everywhere I turned, people were talking about family gatherings, travel plans, Christmas traditions. I tried to focus on the end-of-year reports in front of me, but my mind kept circling back to one thing: the annual Brooks Christmas Gala. For as long as I could remember, it had been the social event of the year in Newport. Reporters, investors, politicians. It wasn't just a family gathering. It was a stage. And for years I'd watched it from the edges, the lesser daughter tolerated, but never embraced. Last year I'd been explicitly told not to come. My father's words still echoed in my head. "You don't belong in my world." Now that world doesn't exist anymore. Brooks Holdings had dissolved under scandal. The mansion was up for sale, and my father was living quietly in a smaller home by the marina. The thought of him sitting alone that Christmas, no ballroom lights, no guests, no empire, haunted me more than I wanted to admit. By noon, Claire noticed my distraction. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" she asked, handing me a mug of coffee. I smiled faintly. "There's nothing to go to. The gala's over. The Brooks name isn't glittering anymore." She leaned against my desk. "Still, he's your father." "I know," I said softly. "That's the hardest part." 2 days before Christmas, a small envelope arrived at Lumen's headquarters. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar at first glance, but I recognized it after a few seconds. My mother's. Natalie. "We're having a quiet dinner on Christmas Eve. Just family. No press, no investors. Your father would like you to come. Love, Mom." For a long time I stared at the card, unsure whether to laugh or cry. A year ago I'd been uninvited. Now they were asking me back into the ruins of their own making. On Christmas Eve, I found myself driving toward Newport again, headlights cutting through a curtain of snow. The roads were nearly empty, the world hushed and glittering. When I reached the old estate, the gates stood open for the first time in my memory. Inside, the house looked smaller, stripped of its usual opulence. Only a few candles flickered in the foyer, and the tree in the corner was modest real pine, not imported, its decorations mismatched and simple. My mother appeared in the doorway wearing a soft gray sweater instead of her usual designer gowns. "You came?" she said, her voice warm but tentative. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted. She smiled sadly. Neither was I. She closed the door behind me, and for the first time her shoulders seemed less tense, as if the requirement to keep up appearances had finally lifted. The dining room was quiet, just the three of us, her, my brother, Michael, and my father. The long mahogany table that once held 40 guests now bore only a few dishes and a bottle of wine. For a moment no one spoke. Then my father lifted his glass slightly. "To new beginnings," he said. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just eat." Dinner was awkward. Conversation stumbled, paused, and started again like a broken record. My father looked thinner, older. The sharpness in his eyes had dulled into something almost human. At one point he set down his fork and looked directly at me. "I heard about your new partnership with Crestview," he said quietly. "Global expansion." "Congratulations." "Thank you," I said. He nodded, fingers tapping against his wine glass. "You built something extraordinary." "I built something different," I corrected. Silence followed. Then unexpectedly he laughed, a soft, tired sound. "Different is good," he said. "Better maybe." I didn't know what to say to that. After dinner my mother lit the fireplace while Michael poured coffee. The air filled with warmth and the faint smell of cinnamon. My father leaned back in his chair, studying the flames. "You know," he said, "I used to think Christmas was about proving how successful we were. The right guests, the right champagne, the right headlines." He paused, his voice low. "I think that's why I lost everything. I forgot it was supposed to mean something." He looked at me, then really looked at me. "You remembered." My throat tightened. For years, I'd waited for acknowledgement, for any sign that he understood. I never thought it would come like this, quietly, without grandeur, just truth between the wreckage. "I didn't build Lumen to prove anything to you," I said. "I built it because I needed to know I was enough. For myself." He nodded slowly. And are you? The question hung in the air. I thought about the sleepless nights, the fear, the risks. I thought about standing on that San Francisco stage speaking about belonging, about creating space for others. I thought about peace, not revenge, not triumph, but stillness. Yes, I said finally. I am. He smiled a small, fragile smile that carried both pride and regret. Later that night, as snow fell thick outside, we moved into the living room. My mother put on an old record, Frank Sinatra's voice, filling the space where laughter used to be. Michael drifted off early, leaving the three of us in near silence. Before Michael left, he gave me a brief apologetic nod, not for stealing the idea, but simply for the mess of it all. It was the only admission I would ever get from him. My father spoke again, barely above a whisper. I used to think strength was control. Now I think it's humility. I watched the firelight dance across his face, softening the hard lines that once defined him. It's both, I said. But it starts with humility. When I finally stood to leave, he rose too. Natalie, he said, his tone careful, almost reverent. I can't undo what I said. But I'm proud of you. Not because of the money or the success, because you kept your soul when I lost mine. I met his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see him as untouchable. I saw him as a man, a flawed, frightened man who had finally learned what worth truly meant. Thank you, I said softly. Outside, the snow had deepened. The air was cold enough to sting, but I didn't mind. As I walked toward my car, I looked back through the window. My parents sat side by the fire, their silhouettes framed in the warm glow. I drove away knowing my mother had made her choice to stay in the quiet, real version of her home, finally free from the performance. On the drive home, my phone buzzed a message from Claire. Merry Christmas, boss. You did it. The world finally knows who you are. I smiled, the road ahead stretching clean and endless beneath the snow. This Christmas wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about peace. And for the first time, I truly had it. The new year came quietly without the fireworks or champagne toasts that used to fill my parents' estate. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing something. The chaos had settled. The noise had faded. All that was left was the steady rhythm of creation, of building something that finally belonged to me. Lumen Digital was no longer just a company. It had become a movement. We'd expanded into Europe and Asia within 6 months, our client list growing faster than we could hire. Reporters called us the blueprint for ethical tech, a label that made me smile every time. After everything my father's empire had represented, greed, illusion, manipulation, mine stood for transparency and integrity. Claire walked into my office one morning with a grin that gave away good news. Guess who just got nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year? I laughed. Let me guess. You, she rolled her eyes. Very funny. No, you, Nat. You. And not regional, national. I leaned back in my chair, the words slow to sink in. National, she repeated, waving the email in triumph. They're hosting the ceremony in Los Angeles. You'll be sitting beside CEOs from Google, Oracle, Tesla. The real elite. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I'd been told I didn't belong in my father's elite world. Now I was being seated at a table they couldn't even buy their way into. When the day of the ceremony came, the hotel ballroom glimmered with polished ambition, chandeliers, velvet drapes, tuxedos, and practiced smiles. Claire sat beside me nervously, smoothing her dress. Does it feel weird? She asked. What, being here? After everything. I thought for a moment. No, I said finally. It feels earned. When they called my name, the applause rose like a wave. I walked to the stage, the spotlight bright but not blinding. The announcer's voice echoed, "For building one of the fastest-growing independent tech firms in the country, redefining integrity and innovation, and proving that legacy is not inherited, it's earned. Congratulations, Natalie Brooks." I took the microphone, my heart calm. Thank you, I began. When I started Lumen Digital, I didn't have investors' family connections or approval. I had an idea and a belief that worth shouldn't be measured by who validates you, but by what you build when no one's watching. A few people nodded. Others just listened silent. Success, I continued, isn't about how high you climb, but what you leave standing when the spotlight fades. It's about building something that lasts, something that doesn't crumble when pride or power are stripped away. It's about building something real. When I stepped off the stage, the applause was thunderous. Claire hugged me, whispering, "Your dad's watching this somewhere." "You know that, right?" I smiled softly. "I hope he is." Later that night, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to check my messages. Among the dozens of congratulations, one email stood out. The subject line was simple: "Proud of you." It was from him. No signature, no long message, just 2 words. But they landed with a weight that surprised me. For years, I'd wanted to hear that. I used to think those words would fix something inside me, fill the space where his approval had never reached. But reading them now, I realized they didn't change a thing. Because I didn't need them anymore. The next morning, I flew back to New York. Snow still covered the city, sparkling under the winter sun. When I walked into Lumen's office, the team was gathered around the conference table, clapping and cheering. Claire raised a glass. "To our fearless founder, the woman who taught us that revenge can look a lot like peace." Everyone laughed. I blushed, shaking my head. "It's not revenge," I said. "It's resilience." We toasted to that resilience, rebuilding, rebirth. Later that afternoon, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty office. The walls were lined with photos of our early days, messy desks, takeout boxes, late-night coding sessions. On one shelf sat a framed article, "From Disowned to Dominant: How Natalie Brooks Redefined Success." I smiled at the headline, not because of the drama, but because it missed the truth. Success hadn't been about proving him wrong. It had been about proving myself right. The phone on my desk buzzed, another call from a publisher asking for a book deal, another investor hoping to buy a stake. I ignored it. Instead, I sat down at my desk, pulled out a notebook, and began writing something new. Not code, not strategy. A vision. A year from now, I wanted to launch something different. A foundation to mentor young women starting their own companies. A place where they could find the support I never had. A space built not on privilege or name, but on purpose. I wrote the title at the top of the page, The Lumen Initiative. That night I walked home through the quiet streets of Manhattan, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. The city buzzed around me, neon signs reflecting off puddles like shifting constellations. As I crossed Fifth Avenue, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "Your father's been better," she said. "He's consulting for smaller firms now. Humble work. It's good for him." "I'm glad," I said. "He keeps a clipping of your Forbes cover on his desk," she added gently. "He shows it to people you know." I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened, not with pride, but with something quieter: acceptance. "Thanks for telling me," I said softly. When I hung up, I looked up at the night sky. Somewhere high above the skyline, the stars were faint but steady. I thought about everything I'd lost: his approval, that family name, the illusion of belonging, and realized none of it had been a loss at all. It had been a trade. I traded comfort for purpose, validation for freedom, a name for a legacy. When I reached my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, the lights of the city stretching endlessly below. This was my world now, not inherited, not borrowed, but built. Brick by brick, choice by choice, and for the first time I knew that empire would last. It was almost a year to the day since that last Christmas at my parents' house, when I found myself back in Newport, not as the daughter they pitied, not as the outcast they once dismissed, but as someone who had finally stopped needing either title. The old estate had been sold to another family months ago. My father lived in a modest home near the marina, now the kind with peeling paint and wind chimes that never stopped moving. He called it temporary, but I knew he liked the simplicity. There was no staff, no polished silver, no illusions left to maintain. When I arrived, He was sitting on the porch in an old wool coat reading the paper. He looked up, and for the first time in my life, he didn't look like a man trying to command a room. He just looked like my father. "You came," he said quietly. "I told Mom I'd stop by. She's inside," he said, gesturing toward the door. "Baking cookies. Don't laugh, she's actually getting good at it," I smiled. "I'll believe that when I taste them." He chuckled softly. "Fair." We sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of seagulls breaking the stillness. Then he folded the newspaper, setting it aside. "You're in the news again," he said. "That article about your foundation, it's everywhere." I nodded. "The Lumen Initiative launched last week. We're funding 50 new startups next quarter." His eyes flickered with something between pride and humility. 50-50. I repeated. All women-led, all independent. He exhaled slowly, looking out toward the water. "You built something. Good, Nat. Not just successful good. I didn't think that kind of business existed anymore." "It can," I said, "if you remember who it's for." He was quiet for a long time. I wish I'd known how to build something like that. Everything I touched turned into a performance. "You were good at it," I said gently. "Too good." He nodded, eyes glinting in the sunlight. That was the problem. Inside, I could hear my mother humming a soft, unfamiliar sound that reminded me of peace. For years, she'd been the perfect wife of a powerful man, all control and appearances. Now she moved freely through her smaller world, laughing more easily, smiling without permission. She appeared at the door a few minutes later, wiping flour from her hands. "You're early," she said with genuine warmth. "Come taste these before your father eats all of them." He rolled his eyes. "I've had 2. 4, she corrected. I laughed. For the first time, it felt like a home, not a stage. Over coffee and cookies, we talked not about business or money or reputation, but about life. About the neighbors who stopped by with fresh bread. About the Marina cat that had decided to live on their porch. About small, ordinary things that used to feel too insignificant for my father's world. At one point, he looked at me across the table. "You know," he said, "I used to think you were angry because you wanted my approval. But I think now, you were angry because I never gave you space to be yourself." He wasn't wrong. "I was angry," I said softly. "But not anymore." The sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the kitchen. I stood to leave, but my mother caught my hand. "Stay for dinner," she said. "It's just soup, but I can't," I said. "Flight to London tonight." "Business?" my father asked. Always I smiled. He nodded. "You're doing good work, Natalie. Keep doing it." Outside, the air was crisp, and the wind carried the faint scent of salt and pine. My father followed me to the car, standing with his hands tucked into his coat pockets. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" he asked quietly. "If I'd been different. If we'd understood each other sooner." Sometimes I admitted. "But then I remember if you hadn't been who you were, I wouldn't be who I am." He smiled, the kind of smile that carried surrender instead of pride. "Then maybe I did something right after all." "Maybe you did," I said and meant it. The drive back to the city was long, the sky painted with streaks of rose and amber. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Emails, updates, congratulations, but I didn't check it. For once, I didn't feel the pull of urgency. When I reached my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window looking out at the city that had once terrified me. The skyline glowed like a heartbeat, steady, alive, unbothered by the ghosts of old names or legacies. I thought of everything that had led me here, the humiliation at that Christmas party, the quiet years of rebuilding, the long nights when no one believed in me. Every scar had become a story, every failure a foundation. And in the quiet, I finally understood something I'd spent years chasing. Revenge had never been the goal. Justice wasn't even the reward. Freedom was. The freedom to define my own worth. To build something without permission. To choose peace over performance. I took out my journal, the one I'd kept since the beginning, and turned to the last page. The ink was faded, the early entries filled with desperation, anger, and self-doubt. But tonight I wrote something simple. I didn't win by beating them. I won by becoming someone they couldn't touch. I closed the book and looked out at the city again. Across the skyline, the Lumen Digital logo flickered on a billboard, bright, clean, strong. Beneath it, smaller text scrolled across the screen, empowering those the world once overlooked. I smiled. That was the story I wanted people to remember. Not the scandal, not revenge, the rebirth. As midnight approached the city, lights shimmered against the glass. My phone buzzed one last time. There was also a brief professional message from Daniel Ross congratulating her on the initiative. He'd seen the light too, but from a distance. I opened Claire's message. Happy anniversary, boss. 1 year since everything changed. Proud to be building this with you. I typed back, 1 year since we stopped surviving and started creating. Then, as the city exhaled beneath me, I whispered something to the night, a quiet promise to the woman I had been. You were always worthy. Michael is, well, he's starting over too, doing consulting for a smaller firm in Florida. They're all having to learn what it means to start small. Outside, the lights of New York glowed like constellations. The world was still noisy, still imperfect, but inside me there was nothing but calm. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd climbed out of someone else's shadow. I felt like I'd found my own light.